He forced his pregnant wife to sleep in a dog shed, unaware she is the daughter of a billionaire. The house of echoing blows. The rain in ABA had a particular personality. It didn't fall, it attacked. It drummed a frantic, suffocating rhythm on the corrugated zinc roofs of the cramped compound at 24 Nwabwi Street, turning the ochre earth into a thick, clinging soup. Inside the three-room apartment he shared with his parents and two younger sisters, 6-year-old Chinidu Uzoma sat perfectly still on a low stool in the corner of the parlor, a geography textbook open but unseeing on his lap. His stillness was not born of concentration, but of a primal, learned instinct, the instinct to be small, to be quiet, to become part of the furniture. The real lesson of the evening was not in the book. It was unfolding in the center of the room, under the weak, yellowish glow of a single kerosene lantern. His mother, Uzomako, was a wisp of a woman, her beauty worn thin by a lifetime of weathering. She was kneeling, picking up shards of a broken plate. China, her one pride from her bridal trousseau, from the cement floor. EBA and bitter leaf soup were splattered like a violent painting against the wall. The air was thick with the smell of okra and shame. His father, Izuchukwu, a broad-shouldered man with eyes that could glitter with charm or go flat and dead as a shark's, stood over her. He was still breathing heavily, his chest expanding like a bellows. "Foolish woman," he spat, the words hissing through the spaces in his teeth. "You serve me slop? You think I work like an elephant at that motor park to come home and eat slop from a careless woman's hand?" Uzomako didn't look up. Her fingers, delicate and quick, darted among the ceramic pieces. It slipped, Zuchi. My hand was wet. I am sorry. Sorry? Your sorry will not fill my belly. He took a sudden step forward, and Chinidu flinched, his tiny shoulders curling inward. But his father just kicked a larger piece of the plate, sending it skittering to tap against Chinidu's stool. "Clean it. Every grain. Or you will lick it from the floor." Chinidu dared a glance at his mother's face. There was no anger there, no fire of rebellion. Just a profound, weary resignation, as if this scene were a tedious play she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. This, more than the shouting, confused him. Why didn't she fight back? Why didn't she run? Later, after the floor was spotless and a fresh, silent meal of bread and tea had been consumed, Chinidu lay on the thin mattress he shared with his sisters in the adjoining room. The curtain separating their space from the main bedroom was thin, worn cotton. He could hear everything. The low, guttural murmur of his father's voice. The soft, pleading whisper of his mother's. "Biko, not tonight." The children. A sharp sound, like a hand meeting flesh, but muffled. Then a small, choked cry, instantly stifled. Then the rhythmic creaking of the bed, a sound that made Chinidu pull the scratchy blanket over his head and press his hands against his ears. This was the soundtrack of his nights. The violence wasn't always the dramatic breaking of plates. Sometimes it was this, a private, nocturnal punishment, a secret transaction of power and pain that seeped through the walls. The lessons were daily, intricate. Lesson 1. A man's anger is a natural force. One afternoon, Chinidu's father came home to find his favorite shirt, the cream-colored one with the fine pinstripes, still damp on the line. The sun had been hidden behind clouds. Uzomako had been nursing a feverish child all day. The explanation was a trigger. "Are you blind? Or just lazy?" Izuchukwu roared, yanking the shirt from the line and throwing it in the mud. He didn't hit her then. He grabbed the plastic wash basin, filled it from the rain barrel, and upturned it over the firewood she had just gathered. "If my shirt is wet, let everything be wet. Let us all be uncomfortable." Chinidu watched from the doorway. His father's rage wasn't a loss of control. It was a tool, a deliberate and theatrical display meant to reorder the world to his liking. And it worked. His mother scurried, rewashing the shirt by hand, her teeth chattering as she relit the fire with damp wood. The lesson: a man's displeasure could alter the very elements of the home. His anger was like the ABA rain, unpredictable, drenching, and everyone had to get wet. Lesson 2. A woman's love is synonymous with endurance. After a particularly bad night, Chinidu found his mother at dawn, cooking akamu over the outdoor hearth. A vivid purple bruise bloomed like a malevolent flower around her left eye. She saw him staring and managed a fragile smile. "Come, NWAM," she whispered, pulling him close. The smell of wood smoke and her sweat was comforting. Your father, he has many worries. The job, the money. We must be strong for him. We must help him carry his burdens. Love means to bear things, Aquia, to be patient. She kissed his forehead. In that moment, her tenderness felt like a reward for her suffering. Chinidu's childish mind forged a connection. Her love for him, her gentle touch, was born from the same well as her acceptance of his father's blows. To be loved by her was to accept this world. Her endurance was her greatest virtue, her silence her strength. Lesson 3. The outside world must see a palace. Sundays were a masterpiece of deception. Izuchukwu would transform. In his sparkling white isi agu lionhead gown, he was the picture of pious success. He would hold Uzomako's elbow gently as they walked to the nearby Pentecostal church, calling her my jewel in front of the pastor. Chinidu and his sisters, in their starched best, were his blessings from God. At church, his father would pray the loudest, shout, Amen, with fervor, and donate money with a flourish. People respected him. They called him a solid man. At home later, if the meal wasn't perfect, the solid man would solidify his authority with a backhand. The hypocrisy wasn't lost on the young Chinidu. It was another lesson. What happened in the house was secret, sacred in its own dark way. The outside world received a performance, a carefully crafted story of harmony. A real man controlled the narrative. Lesson 4. Intervention is futility. When Chinidu was 10, something in him broke. His father had pushed his mother, and she'd fallen against the sharp edge of the table, a line of blood appearing on her arm. A red rage, hot and blinding, filled Chinidu. Without thinking, he launched himself at his father's leg, pounding small fists against the mountain of a man. Stop it. Leave her alone. Time froze. His mother's eyes went wide with terror, not for herself, but for him. His father looked down, more surprised than angry. Then, a slow, cold smile spread across his face. He grabbed Chinidu by the collar of his school shirt, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. So, Izuchukwu said, his voice dangerously calm. The puppy has teeth. You want to be the man of the house? You want to protect your mother? He carried the kicking boy to the backyard, to the stunted pear tree. A man provides. A man punishes. A man controls. Let me teach you control. He didn't hit Chinidu. Instead, he made him hold 2 buckets of water, arms outstretched, until the boy's muscles screamed and trembled and the buckets dropped, soaking him. Again, his father commanded. It went on for an hour. Exhaustion, not pain, was the punishment. Later, as Chinidu lay aching on the floor, his mother crept to him, rubbing his arms with balm, tears in her eyes. You must not, she begged. You will only make it worse. For both of us. Please, NWAM, just be quiet. The lesson was seared into his soul. Defiance multiplied the suffering. The only way to survive was to accept the hierarchy. His attempt at protection had been a child's folly. Real power was his father's alone. By the time Chinidu turned 15, the blueprint was complete. The echoes of blows had shaped the architecture of his mind. He felt a simmering contempt for his mother's weakness, even as he loved her. He feared his father, but also admired the raw, terrifying power he wielded. He believed, in a deep, unexamined part of himself, that this was simply how things were. Men were volcanoes. Women were the fertile, scorched earth around them. Love was a turbulent weather system, with seasons of calm and storms of necessary correction. The house at 24 Nwabwi Street was more than a home. It was a factory, producing a broken template for manhood, one silent, horrified witness at a time. And Chinidu, his young heart now armored in misconception, was its most dedicated graduate, ready to one day build a home on its fractured foundation. A world of deliberate shadow. Port Harcourt breathed differently than ABA. It didn't just rain. It shimmered with a slick, oily heat that rose from the refinery stacks and clung to the gleaming glass of new bank buildings. The air hummed with ambition and the low thrum of generators, a city built on black gold and relentless hustle. Here, a man could reinvent himself, and Chinidu Uzoma, now 28, was diligently trying to do just that. He worked as a logistics coordinator for a shipping firm on Transamati Road. He wore crisp polo shirts with the company logo, spoke with a measured confidence learned from YouTube motivational speakers, and had cultivated a laugh that was just a little too loud. He had left the echoes of ABA behind, or so he told himself. The blueprint was buried, not discarded. Across the city, in a modest but tasteful one-bedroom apartment in the GRA Phase 2, a woman named Neka lived a life of deliberate, calculated simplicity. To her neighbors and colleagues, she was Neka Ease, an orphan from Jos who had built a quiet life through sheer talent and grit. She was a senior graphic designer for a boutique advertising agency, known for her preternatural calm and the stunning, evocative visuals she created. Her apartment was a sanctuary of soft neutrals, thriving indoor plants, and shelves heavy with art, books, and novels. There were no photos of family on the walls. The truth, locked in a safety deposit box and guarded by a discreet lawyer in Lagos, was that Neka was Neka Okonkwo. Her father was Chief Ebenezer Okonkwo, the titan of Port Harcourt, whose empire spanned oil and gas, real estate, and telecommunications. Her mother, a renowned cardiologist, had died when Neka was 12, leaving her in the care of a father whose love was as vast as his fortune and as smothering as a weighted blanket. Her childhood had been a gilded cage, armed drivers, international boarding schools, holidays in Dubai where she never spoke to anyone who hadn't been vetted. Her father's love was expressed in contracts and security details, in diamond necklaces that felt like chains. After university in the UK, where she'd insisted on studying design against his wishes for law or business, she had staged her quiet rebellion. With the help of a trusted, sympathetic aunt, she had created Neka Ease. She used a small, self-funded trust from her maternal grandmother to rent the apartment and live modestly. She wanted to breathe air that wasn't filtered through wealth, to hear laughter that wasn't tinged with sycophancy, to be loved for the woman she was, not the dynasty she represented. Their worlds collided on a humid Tuesday at a client meeting. Chinidu's firm was launching a new regional service, and Neka's agency had won the branding contract. He arrived, portfolio in hand, full of the brash energy of a man who had fought for his seat at the table. She arrived last, slipping into the conference room with a soft, "Good morning." While others argued over timelines and costs, she sketched on a notepad. Chinidu was struck not by ostentatious beauty, but by a profound sense of calm. She had large, observant eyes that seemed to absorb the room's energy rather than deflect it. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and clear, cutting through the chatter. The concept should be about connection, not just movement. Like a river finding its tributaries. She flipped her notepad, revealing a stunning, fluid sketch of the Niger Delta's waterways morphing into data streams. He was captivated. Here was a woman of substance, of quiet intelligence. He saw her modest car, her simple but elegant Ankara dresses, her lack of pretense. He projected onto her a narrative of struggle and hard-won success that mirrored his own desired image. He asked her out for coffee, his approach confident. To his surprise, she agreed. For Neka, Chinidu was a revelation of a different kind. He was direct, earthy, and seemingly transparent. He spoke of growing up in ABA with a candor that felt raw and real. He omitted the soundtrack of violence, speaking only of a strict father. He talked about his plans, his ambitions to own his own fleet of trucks. He listened to her talk about color theory and Nigerian modern art with a focus that made her feel truly heard. He wasn't intimidated by her intellect. He seemed energized by it. He was a man of the world, she thought, untethered from the sterile, transactional relationships of her father's circle. Their courtship was a sweet, slow burn. They explored Port Harcourt's underbelly together, eating spicy ISIU at dusty roadside joints, dancing to highlife at unpretentious bars, taking weekend drives to the quiet beaches of Bonny. Neka felt a freedom she had never known. She loved the weight of his arm around her shoulders, the sound of his laugh in the open air. She was falling in love with the person she was when she was with him, ordinary, unguarded, real. Chinidu was, for the first time, building something that felt entirely his own. Neka's calmness was a balm to the restless, unseen anger that still churned within him. Her independence was a challenge he found thrilling. Her deference to his opinions in matters of the real world flattered him. He saw her carefulness as vulnerability, her secrecy about a past she'd only vaguely describe as difficult as a shared wound. He was the strong one, the provider, the anchor. The role felt instinctively, deeply right. He never asked about family beyond her fabricated story of loss. She never volunteered more. She paid her share of bills meticulously, refusing any extravagant gifts. He admired her pride, unaware it was the discipline of a billionaire's daughter maintaining a cover. To him, her world was as it appeared, a well-ordered, modest achievement built from nothing. He had found a jewel in the rough, and he was the lucky man to polish her, to claim her. One evening, on the balcony of her apartment overlooking a small, communal garden, he held her hand as the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. "You amaze me, Neka," he said, his voice thick. "You've built all this on your own. You're so strong, yet so gentle." She leaned into him, her heart full. "With you," she whispered, "I don't have to be so strong all the time." It was the truth, but in that moment, they were both speaking different languages. She was talking about a respite from lifelong isolation and expectation. He was hearing an invitation to be her fortress, her sole protector, a role that, in the blueprint from ABA, came with absolute authority. He kissed her, a promise forming in his mind. He would give her the world, and in return, she would be his perfect, peaceful haven, a testament to the man he had become. He saw no shadows lurking at the edges of their paradise, only the bright, hard-won future he was constructing, brick by careful brick, over the old, fractured foundation he carried everywhere. The first fracture. The honeymoon period of their relationship was a gilded thing. 6 months where the blueprint remained dormant, gathering dust in the dark attic of Chinidu's psyche. They were Nikan Chinidu, a single, happy entity. They spent weekends at Port Harcourt's cinema complex, his arm draped comfortably around her shoulders in the dark. They cooked jollof rice together in her small kitchen, laughing when it stuck to the bottom of the pot. He called her Nem, my mother, a term of deep endearment, and she'd blush, calling him Odom, my wall. But walls, as Chinidu understood them from ABA, were not just for shelter. They were for defining territory. The first crack appeared on a Sunday evening, trivial in its origin, seismic in its implication. Chinidu had a major client presentation the next morning. His only cream-colored dress shirt, the one he felt brought him luck and projected competence, was wrinkled. He had explicitly asked Neka to have it ironed and ready. "Nem, where's my shirt?" "The cream one," he asked, his voice already tight with the pre-presentation anxiety that always simmered as anger. Neka looked up from her sketchpad on the sofa. She'd had a taxing day herself, finalizing a complex logo design. "Oh, Chinidu, I'm so sorry. The iron, it sparked and died this afternoon. I completely forgot in the rush to get a new one. I can run out quickly? There's a tailor down the road who—" "You forgot." The words were flat, cold stones dropped into the warm room. The anxiety in his gut morphed, seamlessly and familiarly, into a hot spike of betrayal. His need for control, for a world that obeyed his direct instructions, felt violated. This was no longer about a shirt. It was about order. His order. "I said it was important. The biggest meeting of the quarter. And you were drawing?" He gestured dismissively at her sketchpad. Neka stood up, a placating smile on her face. She moved towards him, her hand outstretched. "My love, it's just a shirt. I'll get it sorted in 20 minutes. It's not the end of the—" "Not the end of the world?" he echoed, his voice rising. The tone was new to her, a sharp, serrated edge that cut through their usual calm. It triggered a faint, distant alarm in her, but she attributed it to his stress. "You don't decide what is important in my work. I decide. I provide, I plan, and you support. That is the arrangement. A simple thing. One simple thing." He was looming now, his frame blocking the light from the lamp. The shadow that fell over her was long and chillingly familiar, though she couldn't place why. The air in the room changed, growing thick and charged. "Chinidu, please," she said, her voice softening into a plea, the same instinctive tone his mother had used 1,000 times. "Let me fix it." Something about that tone, the submissive cadence, the acknowledgement of his primary frustration, should have disarmed him. But in the twisted wiring of his childhood lessons, it was the trigger. It was the sound of the other party accepting blame, and in the courtroom of his mind, acceptance of blame demanded sentencing. His hand moved faster than thought. It was not a clenched fist, but an open palm strike, a swift, shocking crack that connected with the side of her face. The sound was unreal. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Neka staggered back a step, her hand flying to her cheek. The sensation was less pain at first, more a stunning, total numbness. followed by a spreading heat. Her eyes, wide with incomprehension, met his. In Shinidu's eyes, she saw a terrifying flicker, not of remorse, but of a strange, satisfied recognition, as if he had just performed a necessary, if unpleasant, function. Then, it was gone, replaced by a dawning horror of his own. The look on her face, the shattered trust, the sheer disbelief, pierced the fever dream of his anger. Neka, oh God. Nem, his voice broke. The anger evaporated, leaving a vacuum that filled instantly with a sickening panic. He reached for her. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't. The stress, the meeting. I lost myself. Please. He was crying. Great, heaving sobs that shook his broad shoulders. He fell to his knees before her, wrapping his arms around her waist, burying his face against her. I am a devil. A worthless fool. Forgive me, Baiko. It will never happen again. Never. I swear on my mother's life. Neka stood frozen, her mind reeling. The pain in her cheek was now a sharp, throbbing reality. But his tears, his utter collapse, were more disorienting. The man who had struck her was gone, replaced by this shattered, weeping boy. The violence felt like a bizarre anomaly, a terrifying glitch in the man she loved. And his remorse, it seemed so profound, so absolute. Her own instincts, nurtured in a world of privilege where problems were solved by lawyers and whispers, were useless. But her heart, so full of love for the man she knew, the funny, ambitious, attentive Chinidu, spoke louder. This was a mistake. A horrible, one-time mistake born of pressure. He was sorry. He was begging. Tentatively, her hand left her stinging cheek and came to rest on his head, his hair coarse under her fingers. She felt his tears soak through her dress. A profound, misguided pity welled up in her. He was in such pain. Shoo, she whispered, her own voice trembling. It's okay. It's not okay, he wailed, clutching her tighter. I am a monster, but I will change. I promise you. Never again. Never. He repeated it like a prayer. Never again. She believed him. She had to. The alternative, that the man she loved contained this darkness as a permanent feature, was unthinkable. So, she chose the thinkable. She chose the narrative of the stressful moment, the lost temper, the profound apology. She helped him to his feet. She let him gently pack her cheek with ice from her freezer, his hands shaking. She accepted his whispered promises as they lay in bed that night, his body curled around hers as if shielding her from himself. The next day, he brought her flowers and her favorite puff-puff. He was tender, overly attentive. The shirt was forgotten. He aced his presentation. A week passed, then a month. The incident sat between them like a ghost, but a ghost he seemed to have successfully banished with his devotion. The blueprint, having flexed its power, slid back into the shadows. Neka, her cheek healed to a faint, yellowing memory, allowed herself to believe it was an exorcism. But in the quiet of her mind, a small, cold seed had been planted. A seed of fear, and she had, with her forgiveness, watered it. The first fracture was not just in her skin, but in the very foundation of their world. The wall she called Odin had shown it could not only shelter, but could also, with a single, swift motion, crush. The choreography of fear. The silence after the first slap was a fragile, deceptive thing. For a few weeks, the air in Neka's apartment felt thin and over-sanitized, as if they were both holding their breath. Chinidu was a model of contrition. He brought her small gifts, a new set of sketching pencils, the expensive cashew nuts she liked. He did the dishes without being asked. His voice rarely rose above a murmur. He was meticulously, painfully gentle, treating her like a porcelain vase he'd almost shattered. Neka clung to this version of him. She studied his moods like a meteorologist tracking a volatile sky. She learned the subtle signs, the tightening of his jaw when traffic was bad, the way he'd fall into a brooding silence after a stressful call from work, the specific cadence of his sigh that meant frustration was curdling into something darker. She became adept at preemptive soothing, a cool drink placed in his hand, a distracting anecdote, a back rub before he could even ask. She told herself this was love. This was being a supportive partner. The blueprint, however, had been awakened. It was no longer a dormant set of instructions. It was a living script, and Shinidu found himself slipping into its familiar scenes almost against his will. The trigger for the second incident was not a wrinkled shirt, but a word. They were at a work hangout. a casual Friday drink at a popular bar on Stadium Road. Neka, naturally graceful and effortlessly engaging, was in her element. She was deep in conversation with a colleague from her agency, a jovial, bespectacled man named Tund, about a new art exhibition. They were laughing, their heads perhaps a little too close together to hear over the music. Chinidu, watching from across the table with a group of his own mates, felt a cold spike drill into his gut. It was a possessive, searing jealousy that he could not rationalize. In his mind, her laughter was a flame, and any man near her was a moth he had to swat away. The car ride home was arctic. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "You and that ton seemed very familiar," he said, his voice dangerously calm. Neka, pleasantly tired, missed the warning. "Oh, he's lovely. Really knows his stuff. He was telling me about this incredible sculptor from—" "I don't care what he was telling you." The sentence was a whip crack. "You were flirting. In front of my friends. You made me look like a fool." Shock washed over her. "Chinidu, no? We were just talking about work. He's married, for God's sake. So? A hungry dog doesn't care whose compound the bone is in." The injustice of it, the sheer irrationality, sparked a rare flare of defiance in Neka. "That is a disgusting thing to say. About me and about him. I was not flirting. You're being ridiculous." Ridiculous. The word hung in the enclosed space of the car like a struck gong. It was a challenge, a negation of his perception, his authority. He pulled over abruptly on the dark, tree-lined street, not far from her apartment. He turned to her, his eyes glittering in the dashboard light. "Get out." "What?" "Get out of the car. If I am so ridiculous, walk home." She stared at him, disbelief turning to fear. They were still a 15-minute walk away. The street was poorly lit. "Chinidu, please. Let's just go home and talk." "Get out." His voice was low, guttural, leaving no room for negotiation. Trembling, she fumbled with the door handle and stepped out. Before she could even close the door, he sped off, the taillights disappearing around a corner, leaving her in the thick, humming darkness. She walked quickly, her heart pounding, every shadow a threat. When she finally reached her gate, her keys shaking in her hands, she found him already there, leaning against his car, a look of cold satisfaction on his face. "Next time," he said, pushing off the car and walking towards her, his closeness intimidating. "You will remember to show your man respect in public." He didn't hit her that night. The abandonment, the calculated fright, was the punishment. And it was, in its own way, more chilling. The violence was evolving, becoming psychological, a demonstration that her safety and comfort were privileges he granted and could revoke. The incidents began to weave into the fabric of their life, a grim choreography. The grip. His hand would encircle her upper arm during an argument, not to pull, just to hold, his fingers digging in just enough to promise pain, to leave faint, bracelet-like bruises she'd cover with long sleeves. The shove, a sudden, two-handed push against her shoulders when she blocked his path to the bathroom, sending her stumbling back onto the bed. The verbal lacerations. "You're lucky I put up with you. No other man would tolerate your stubbornness. Your parents clearly didn't teach you how to behave." Each barb about her parents was a twist of the knife only she felt, a secret pain he couldn't even know he was inflicting. After each episode, the script was the same. The storm would break, and then the monsoon of apologies would follow. He would weep, blame stress, blame his past, swear on everything holy that he was fighting his demons and would win for her, for them. He'd promised therapy, never booked, anger management, researched, never attended. Neka, trapped in the cycle, found her own role hardening. Her hope became a desperate, stubborn plant growing in cracked concrete. She became a forensic analyst of his goodness, collecting and cataloging every tender moment. The morning cup of tea he made, the time he defended her in a minor argument with a landlord, as proof that the real Chinidu was still in there, drowning. If she just loved him harder, was more patient, more perfect, she could pull him out. She built a prison of her own making, its bars forged from pity, love, and the terrifying, unspoken question, "If I leave, who am I?" Neka Ease, the independent graphic designer, was becoming indistinguishable from Chinidu's victim, and Neka Okonkwo, the billionaire's daughter, felt more remote than ever, a fantasy life she had forfeited. To go back now would be to admit her grand experiment in authentic love had been a catastrophic failure. To call her father would be to see the devastating disappointment in his eyes, to be swallowed back into the gilded cage. So she stayed. She perfected the dance. She learned when to be silent, when to agree, when to make herself small and invisible. The vibrant woman who debated art and laughed freely continued to exist, but only in the safe spaces between his storms. She was living a double life more profound than the one involving her wealth. She was both the strong, creative professional and the trembling woman checking her partner's eyes for the weather. And with every cycle of outburst and apology, the blueprint in Chinidu's soul gained more validity. It was a brutal, self-reinforcing logic. He acted out, she forgave. Therefore, his actions, while regrettable, must be within the bounds of what love could absorb. The house of their relationship, like the one in ABA, was being built on a foundation of fear, its walls papered over with fragile, recurring promises of never again. The unspoken anchor. The nausea was different. It wasn't the flutter of butterflies or the unease of a rich meal. It was a deep, rolling tide that rose each morning with the sun, a visceral pull that anchored her to the bathroom basin. 3 weeks of this silent, daily ritual before Neka, pale and trembling, stared at her reflection in the misted mirror and knew. A part of her, a part she had almost forgotten, thrilled with a wild, untamed joy. Life. Inside her, a new, tiny universe was spinning into being. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach, imagining a secret sun warming her from within. In that private, watery-eyed moment, the shadows in the apartment, the memory of a grip, the echo of a harsh word, seemed to recede. This was bigger. This was a miracle. She planned the revelation with the care of a military campaign. She waited for a good day. Chinita had just secured a new contract at work. He was in high spirits, humming as he sorted through bills at the small dining table. The evening light was golden and kind. She made his favorite pepper soup, the scent of yaziza and fresh fish filling the apartment. As they ate, she watched him, this man who was both her tormentor and her love. She saw the strong line of his jaw, the intensity in his dark eyes that could so easily kindle into fire, but which now held a contented spark. The father of my child, she thought, and the words were a prayer, an incantation. Chinidu, she began, her voice softer than usual. She reached across the table and took his hand, stilling it. He looked up, surprised by the gravity of her touch. I have something to tell you. His expression shifted from contentment to mild concern. What is it? Are you okay? A small, genuine smile broke through her nerves. I'm more than okay. She took a steadying breath, her eyes locked on his. We're going to have a baby. For a heartbeat, there was perfect silence. She watched his face, a canvas upon which a storm of emotions played out in rapid succession. First, shock, his eyebrows shooting up, his lips parting. Then, a dawning, staggering comprehension. His gaze dropped from her face to her stomach and back again. And then, something miraculous happened. His eyes, so often hardened like slate, softened. They grew shiny, wide with a wonder she had never seen before. It was a look of pure, unguarded awe. A baby, he whispered, the word fragile on his tongue. Our baby. She nodded, tears springing to her own eyes. Our baby. He was out of his chair in an instant, kneeling beside her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his head pressing gently against her belly. His shoulders began to shake. He was weeping, but this was a different kind of tears, not the performative, guilty sobs of his apologies, but deep, gulping cries of overwhelming emotion. Neka, oh my God. Nem, a child, my son, my daughter. He looked up at her, his face wet and radiant. You have made me the happiest man in the world. You have given me everything. In that moment, he was the man she had fallen in love with. Tender, vulnerable, full of a future-focused joy. He promised her the moon. They would move to a bigger apartment, nearer to a good school. He would work harder, become a director, buy a family car. He spoke of teaching a son to play football, of braiding a daughter's hair. The visions he painted were dazzling, domestic, perfect. For Neka, his reaction was a balm and a beacon. This was the transformation she had been waiting for. The seed of new life within her would be the catalyst for new life between them. The profound responsibility of fatherhood would cauterize his anger, would root him in a gentler, more protective love. He would look at this innocent life and finally see the futility of violence. The pregnancy was not just a biological state. In her heart, it became a sacred shield. In the days that followed, Chinedu was attentive in a new way. He fretted over her diet, Googling lists of prenatal foods. He banned her from carrying the heavy grocery bags. He spoke to her belly in a silly, sweet voice when he thought she wasn't listening. He was building the narrative of Chinedu the provider, Chinedu the protector, with renewed vigor, and Nneka gratefully bought into the performance. But a shield, no matter how sacred, is still a defense. And defenses imply an ongoing threat. She soon realized that her condition had not erased the blueprint. It had merely given its lines a different emphasis. His protectiveness quickly morphed into possessiveness. "You shouldn't be out so late," he'd say if she worked past 6, his voice taking on that old, familiar edge. "The baby needs rest, and you need to be home." Her body was no longer entirely her own. It was the vessel for his legacy, and thus subject to his governance. One evening, exhausted after a long day battling morning sickness and a tight deadline, she declined his suggestion to go visit his friend. "I'm just so tired, Odom. My head is pounding. Can we stay in?" His smile faded. "My friend is expecting us. His wife has cooked. It is disrespectful to cancel now." "Nneka, don't be difficult," he said, his voice cooling. "Think of the baby. Fresh air, good company. It will be good for you. You're just cooping yourself up and making yourself sick." The argument was mild, but the underlying message was clear. Even her fatigue, her bodily autonomy, were now topics for his negotiation and override. The pregnancy had given him a new, unimpeachable language of control. "It's for the baby." Yet, Nneka clung to the hope. She felt the first tiny, fluttering kick, a sensation like a trapped butterfly, and she would place Chinedu's hand on her belly, praying the miracle would transfer through his skin, straight to his core. Sometimes, when he felt the movement, his face would soften again into that wonder. Those moments were her lifeline. She was building a castle of hope on a fault line. The child within her was an unspoken anchor, tethering her more firmly than ever to the dangerous shore of Chinedu's love. She believed the anchor would steady the ship. She did not yet understand that in the coming storm, it could be the very thing that would pull her under. The siege within. The second trimester arrived, bringing with it a deceptive calm. Nneka's nausea subsided, replaced by a radiant glow and a gentle, rounding swell to her belly that Chinedu would sometimes rest his hand upon with a quiet pride. For a few weeks, the apartment seemed to breathe easier. The baby became their shared project, a neutral territory. They debated names. He favored strong, traditional Igbo names like Chibik or Adiz. She leaned towards softer, modern blends. They browsed online for cribs, his arm around her shoulders as they scrolled. It was a portrait of expectant bliss. But the fortress of Chinedu's insecurities, temporarily decorated with baby booties, was still under siege from within. The promotion he had been so sure of at work went to a younger colleague with a foreign degree. The bills, which he insisted on managing alone to prove his capability as a provider, began to pile up like silent accusations. The world outside was not bending to his will, and the pressure had to vent somewhere. The vessel of his future, Nneka, became the pressure valve. The control morphed, becoming more insidious, woven into the fabric of their daily life under the guise of care. It began with her phone. "Who is texting you so much?" he'd ask, his eyes not leaving the football match on TV. "It's just my colleague, Amaka, sending me a design mock-up," Nneka would reply, holding the screen towards him. He'd wave it away, a magnanimous king, but the question was a tripwire. She started leaving her phone face down. It was a source of secret anxiety. Then it was her work. "This job of yours, all this stress," he mused one evening as she hunched over her laptop, a deadline looming. "Is it worth it? The baby needs a peaceful mother, not one chasing clients. Maybe you should stop after the birth. A real man should be able to provide." The suggestion was velvet-wrapped, but its core was steel. Her career, her source of independent identity and the last vestige of Nneka's autonomy, was being framed as a threat to their child's well-being. Her body, the site of his supposed reverence, became a canvas for his critique. "You should eat more greens, for the iron," he'd say, pushing the ugu soup towards her while he ate the meat. "The doctor said the weight gain is fine." "Chinedu," she'd protest weakly. "Doctors don't know everything," he'd counter. "I know what a healthy woman looks like." His gaze would sweep over her, not with desire, but with appraisal, as if she were a project he was responsible for completing to specification. The isolation was the most effective tactic. He began to subtly disparage her friends. Tund, the art-loving colleague, was probably a homosexual. Why is he so interested in your life? Amaka was too loud, too modern. She'll fill your head with nonsense. Even casual invitations for lunch were met with a sigh. Why go out and spend money on overpriced pasta when I can cook for you here? It's safer, too. You never know about these restaurants. One by one, the threads connecting her to the outside world frayed and snapped. Her world shrank to the dimensions of their apartment. His moods, its only weather. The verbal lacerations returned, now sharpened with the blade of her condition. After a minor disagreement about a plumber's bill, he stared at her, coldly. You are so argumentative. No wonder your parents are dead. They probably died to get some peace from your troublesome mouth. The air left Neka's lungs. It was a calculated strike, aimed at the most vulnerable, fictional part of her history. She doubled over, not from physical pain, but from the psychic shock of it. The unborn child kicked violently, as if in protest. She fled to the bathroom, locking the door, sliding down to the cool tiles as silent sobs racked her body. She cried for the fictional dead parents he mocked, and for the very real, living father whose love felt a universe away. To call Chief Okonkwo now would be to admit that every instinct that led her here, the craving for normalcy, the belief in a self-made love, had been tragically, dangerously naive. Chinidu, hearing her cries, came to the door. His anger had burnt out, replaced by a panicky remorse. Neka, Baiko, open the door. I didn't mean it. You know I didn't mean it. I am a madman. The stress is eating me. Open the door, for the baby's sake. His apology, as always, was masterful. It contained self-flagellation, an external villain, stress, and the ultimate trump card, the baby. She opened the door, her face swollen, her spirit shattered. He held her, rocking her, whispering promises into her hair. When the baby comes, everything will change. You'll see. We'll be a proper family. I will be better. This is just a difficult season. Neka, nestled against the chest of the man who had just eviscerated her, clung to that promise. A difficult season. She looked down at her belly, at the life stirring within. This child needed a father. It needed a family. She had to see the season through. The hope, now, was no longer for a love rekindled, but for a ceasefire secured by the presence of an innocent. She was no longer a woman waiting for her knight to return. She was a hostage negotiating for the future of her child, believing the captor's promises that the worst was over, if only she would be good, be quiet, be still. The siege was not marked by dramatic battles, but by a slow, steady starving of her spirit. The independent, creative woman was being bricked up inside a tower of prenatal vitamins, silent meals, and carefully curated conversations. The baby was both her reason for endurance and the chain that bound her to the siege. She was waiting for a salvation that, in her mind, could only come from within the very walls that imprisoned her. The breaking point. The air in Port Harcourt had been pregnant for days, not with the promise of life, but with a suffocating, metallic tension. The sky was a bruised tapestry of gray and purple, holding its breath. Inside the small apartment, the atmosphere was a mirror of the heavens, thick, heavy, and electric with unsaid things. Neka moved through the rooms like a ghost, her movements slow and careful, weighted by the 7-month life within her and a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. The baby, a girl she had secretly named Adigo in the quiet of her heart, was active, a constant, fluttering reminder of a future she could hardly envision through the fog of the present. Chinidu had been a coiled spring for a week. A major logistics deal had collapsed due to a port strike, wiping out his quarterly commission. The specter of failure, the provider's nightmare, had sunk its teeth into him. He'd been silent, brooding, the air around him crackling with a volatile energy that made Neka's every nerve stand on end. She had perfected the art of invisibility in these times, silent footsteps, muted sighs, existing as a harmless piece of the scenery. That evening, the storm broke, both inside and out. The first fat raindrops began to patter against the zinc roof, a slow, ominous drumroll. Neka was at the sink, washing the dinner dishes, her back to him. Her phone, lying on the kitchen counter, buzzed once. A preview lit up the screen, a message from Amaka. Saw the mock-ups, next. Brilliant as always. This client will love it. Get some rest, yes? Thinking of you. It was a lifeline, a tiny flare from the world outside. She didn't see Chinidu rise from the sofa, his eyes narrowing at the glowing screen. Who is next? His voice cut through the sound of the rain and running water, cold and sharp. She jumped, her wet hands slipping on a plate. She caught it, her heart hammering. It's Amaka. From work. Just about a project. Amaka. He said the name as if it were a curse. He walked over, picked up her phone, his thumb hovering. This one again. Always whispering. Thinking of you. What is she thinking about it? What stories are you telling her about me? The rain intensified, coming down now in sheets, hammering on the roof like a frantic audience. Chinidu, give me my phone, she said, her voice quiet but firm. It was a tiny stand, a reclaiming of 1 square inch of territory. It's my private message. Private. The word was gasoline. Private? He roared, and the sound seemed to shake the very walls. He slammed the phone back on the counter, the screen cracking like a spider's web. Nothing in this house is private from me. I am the head here. You and your friends, plotting, laughing at me. A useless man who can't even provide? Is that what you tell her? He was advancing on her, his face a mask of wounded, furious pride. The rain was a deafening roar, isolating them in a watery cage. No one is laughing at you, Neka cried, backing away until the sink dug into her spine. She instinctively cradled her belly. She was just being kind. Can't anyone be kind to me without you seeing an enemy? Kind? You don't need her kindness. You have me. Or am I not enough for you? Your high-class taste, your quiet ways, you've always thought you were better. Spittle flew from his lips. The childhood demon of inadequacy, mixed with the professional failure, had fully possessed him. He saw not his pregnant partner, but a vessel of judgment. Please, she begged, the defiance melting into terror as she saw the familiar, glazed look in his eyes. The look that preceded impact. The baby, you'll frighten the baby. It was the wrong thing to say. It reminded him of his failure, of the responsibility he felt crushing him. Don't use my child as a shield for your disrespect, he bellowed. His hand shot out. It wasn't a slap this time. It was a closed fist, driven by a torrent of rage, connecting with the side of her jaw. The world exploded in a supernova of white, blinding pain. She spun, falling against the kitchen table, sending plates crashing to the floor. A second blow, an open-handed smash, caught her ear. A ringing, high-pitched and eternal, filled her head, drowning out the rain. She tasted blood. Get out, he screamed, his voice raw and inhuman. He grabbed her by the shoulders, her pregnancy making her clumsy, off balance. He dragged her, her feet slipping on the wet floor, past the shattered phone, towards the front door. Get out of my house. Go to your Amaka. Let her take care of you and your bastard. He wrenched the door open. A wall of wind and stinging rain blasted into the room. Chinidu, no? I'm pregnant, she wailed, clutching at the doorframe, her fingers scrabbling for purchase. His final shove was monumental, fueled by a hatred for his own helplessness that he misdirected entirely onto her. She stumbled out into the maelstrom, landing on her hands and knees in the fast-flooding courtyard. The door slammed behind her. The lock turned with a click that was final, absolute, and louder than any thunderclap. The cold was instantaneous and shocking. The rain was a merciless, vertical river, soaking her to the skin in seconds, plastering her hair to her face, mixing with the blood from her split lip. She staggered to her feet, pounding on the solid wood. Chinidu, please, let me in. Baiko. Only the fury of the storm answered. The windows were dark. He had retreated into the dry, angry heart of the home, leaving her to the elements. Terror, pure and primal, took over. She was exposed, vulnerable, 7 months pregnant, in a raging storm. Her mind, sharp with adrenaline, scanned the tiny, flooded yard. The gate to the street was padlocked from the inside. The neighbors' doors were shut tight against the weather. And then she saw it. Under the lone, thrashing mango tree was a raised wooden structure, a dog house for Chuka, the neighbor's German shepherd. It was pathetic shelter, but it was the only one. Crawling on her hands and knees through the churning mud, she reached it. Chuka, startled, let out a low whine. Neka looked into the dog's intelligent, confused eyes. Please, she sobbed, the word ripped away by the wind. She curled her body, heavy with child, into the dank, cramped space. The smell of wet wood, damp earth, and dog filled her nostrils. Chuka, after a moment of uncertainty, shifted his large, warm body, making room, his fur providing a scant buffer against the cold. She huddled there, shivering violently, her arms wrapped around her belly. Inside, Adigo kicked fiercely, a frantic drumbeat of alarm. Neka pressed her throbbing face against the dog's side, feeling the steady, animal rhythm of his breath. The rain drummed on the low roof, inches from her head. The water from the ground seeped into her clothes. In that moment, in the filthy shelter meant for an animal, something in Neka finally broke. Not her spirit, that had been bending for months, but the last, fragile filament of hope that had connected her to Chinidu. It snapped cleanly. As she sat in the doghouse, the daughter of a billionaire, heir to empires, she understood with chilling clarity. The man in the dry house would have let her and his child die out here. The love she had fought for was a mirage. The future she had envisioned was a prison cell. The breaking point was not the blow to her face, but the closing of the door. She was, finally and utterly, alone. And in that utter aloneness, a new, steely resolve began to form, cold and hard as the rain-soaked earth beneath her. The unlikely sanctuary. Time lost all meaning in the dark, percussive drum of the rain. It could have been minutes or hours that Neka shivered in the doghouse. Her body became a map of misery, the throbbing, hot ache in her jaw, the cold, deep seeping into her bones, the frantic, panicked kicks of her unborn daughter. Chuka, the German shepherd, seemed to understand her utter desolation. He remained still, a solid, warm wall against her side, occasionally turning his head to lick gently at her trembling hand with a rough, warm tongue. It was a kindness so pure, so devoid of judgment or agenda, that it finally unlocked the tears she'd been choking back. She wept silently, her sobs swallowed by the storm's roar, her tears mingling with the rain on her face. She wept for the shattered illusion of Chinidu. She wept for the father her child would never have in him. She wept for the foolish, hopeful girl who had believed she could build a love on a foundation of secrets. But most of all, she wept from the cold, a deep, systemic chill that seemed to have reached her very soul. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably. When the rain finally began to taper, fading from a torrent to a drizzle and then to a dripping silence, the world felt eerily hollow. The courtyard was a lake of mud and debris. Dawn was a faint, gray smear in the east. With a groan that came from the depths of her being, Neka began to move. Every joint protested. She uncurled her stiff, frozen body from the cramped space, patting Chuka's head in mute thanks. The dog whined softly, as if urging her to stay. She couldn't stay. She had to move. Using the rough wood of the doghouse, she hauled herself to her feet. A wave of dizziness and nausea washed over her, and a deep, rattling cough erupted from her chest, tearing at her raw throat. She was soaked through, her dress a heavy, muddy second skin. Her bare feet were caked in cold filth. She took a step and stumbled, her ankle twisting painfully. Get to the road. Get help. It became a mantra in her foggy mind. She half walked, half crawled towards the padlocked gate. It was too high to climb, especially in her state. Desperate, she began to shout, her voice a ragged, weak thing. Help! Someone! Please! A light flicked on in a neighboring apartment. A curtain twitched. An elderly woman's face appeared, eyes wide with shock at the bedraggled, pregnant figure in the flooded yard. Minutes later, the side gate creaked open, and the woman's son, a young man in a vest, rushed out. Ani, God have mercy. What happened? He didn't wait for an answer. Taking in her bruised face, her mud-splattered pregnancy, and the obvious feverish gleam in her eyes, he acted. Mama, bring blanket. Quick! He scooped Neka up with surprising gentleness. She was too weak to protest, her head lolling against his shoulder. They wrapped her in a thick, dry Ankara wrapper and helped her into a waiting tricycle parked on the main road. The driver, a man named Sani with a kind, worried face, took one look at his passenger and hit the accelerator. Hospital. Now. The ride was a blur of jolting motion and encroaching darkness. The cough in Neka's chest had settled, a painful, constant presence. Her skin was on fire, yet she shivered violently under the blanket. The world outside the trike's open side swam in and out of focus. Sonny kept talking to her, his voice a distant anchor. Stay with me, sister. We are almost there. Breathe. Your baby is strong, you hear me? Just breathe. They arrived at the general hospital in a clamor of urgency. Sonny shouted for help, and orderlies rushed out with a wheelchair. Neko was whisked away from the humid morning air into the stark, antiseptic brightness of the emergency ward. Her muddied feet left faint marks on the clean floor. The medical staff worked with swift, impersonal efficiency. They cut away her wet clothes, covered her with warm blankets, hooked her up to monitors. The steady, rapid whoosh 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 of a Dago's heartbeat filled the small, curtained cubicle, a powerful, resilient sound that made Neko weep with relief. Her own body was failing, but her daughter fought on. A doctor, a woman with tired but kind eyes, examined her. She took in the bruise blossoming on Neka's jaw, the split lip, the terror still etched in her eyes. She listened to the rattling congestion in Neka's lungs. Pneumonia, the doctor said quietly to a nurse. And she's in shock. High-risk pregnancy. We need to admit her, start antibiotics, and monitor the baby closely. She then turned to Neka, her voice softening. My dear, what is your name? Neka. Ease, she whispered through chattering teeth. Neka, who did this to you? Neka closed her eyes, turning her head away on the pillow. The shame was a weight as tangible as the blankets. To say it aloud was to make it irrevocably real. A social worker, a calm-faced man named Mr. Okafor, was called. He sat by her bedside as she was treated, his presence quiet but unwavering. He didn't press, not at first. He simply offered water, adjusted her pillow, and spoke in low, reassuring tones about the excellent care she would receive. It was only after the first dose of antibiotics had been administered, when the shivering had subsided to a tremor and the immediate terror had receded into exhaustion, that Mr. Okafor gently broached the subject again. He held her cracked phone, which the kind neighbor had retrieved. Neka, he said, you are very sick. Your baby is depending on you getting strong. We need to contact someone. A family member. A friend. Who can we call? Neka stared at the water-stained ceiling. The fortress of her secret life was in ruins. There was no Neka-Ease left, only a broken woman in a hospital gown. She had no energy left for the lie. Her hand went to her belly, to the steady beat of the life within. For Adigo, she had to be strong. For Adigo, she had to surrender. With a trembling hand, she pointed to the small, zippered compartment of her handbag, which Sonny had thoughtfully brought in. Mr. Okafor retrieved it. Inside, nestled among lip balm and pens, was a simple, elegant business card. Plain white, with a single embossed name and a private mobile number. Chief Ebenezer Okonkwo. Mr. Okafor's eyes widened just a fraction. Even in his line of work, that name resonated with power. He looked from the card to the fragile, bruised woman in the bed, and a story of immense, deliberate hiding clicked into place. Is this your father? He asked softly. Neka nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the dirt still smudged on her temple. Yes, she croaked. Call him. Please. Tell his daughter needs him. Mr. Okafor stood, the card feeling heavy in his hand. He stepped out of the ward, into the bright hospital hallway. He took a deep breath and dialed the number. It was answered on the second ring by a crisp, formal voice. Chief Okonkwo's office. My name is Okafor, a social worker at Port Harcourt General Hospital. I need to speak with the chief urgently. It's about his daughter, Neka. There was a brief, stunned silence on the line, followed by the sound of a hand covering the receiver and urgent, muffled words. A moment later, a new voice came on, deep, authoritative, and vibrating with a controlled intensity that was palpable even over the phone. This is Ebenezer Okonkwo. What has happened to my child? The Titan's descent. The Okonkwo Gulfstream G650 cut through the turbulent skies over the Niger Delta like a spear of vengeance. Inside, Chief Ebenezer Okonkwo sat perfectly still, a statue carved from obsidian and iron. His hands, usually busy signing billionaire contracts or soothing anxious shareholders, lay motionless on his knees, clenched so tightly the knuckles were bloodless moons. The social worker's words echoed in the silent, pressurized cabin. She is stable, sir, but she has pneumonia, and there are injuries. She was found in a distressed state. The phrase injuries had been a white-hot brand against his soul. Beside him, his head of security, Musa, A man whose quiet demeanor belied a fearsome reputation scanned a tablet, his face grim. The apartment address is confirmed, Chief. The man is one Shinidu Uzoma, logistics coordinator. No significant record. He is currently at his place of employment. The chief did not respond. He was staring out the window, but he did not see the patchwork of mangrove and river below. He saw his Neka at 12, holding his hand tightly at her mother's funeral, her small face a mask of adult grief. He saw her defiant teenage eyes when he'd suggested a career in law. He saw the love in her smile when she'd told him she needed to find her own path, a plea he'd respected with a heart full of fear. He had given her space, monitored her from a respectful, painful distance, assured she was safe and happy. The reports spoke of a modest life, a quiet job, a serious boyfriend. He had been pleased. Now, the magnitude of his miscalculation threatened to crush him. His jewel, his only link to his beloved wife, had been suffering in shadows while he sat in his tower of light. The helicopter transfer from the private airstrip to the hospital roof was a blur of noise and wind. As he strode through the hospital corridors, his custom-made agbada billowing like the sails of a warship, the world seemed to part before him. Administrators materialized, stuttering greetings. Doctors were summoned. He acknowledged no one, his gaze fixed on the door to the private suite Mr. Okafor had arranged. When he entered, the world narrowed to a single point. Neka lay in the hospital bed, dwarfed by its size and the tangle of wires and monitors. She was asleep or unconscious, he couldn't tell. An oxygen tube was taped under her nose. One side of her beautiful face was a horrific tapestry of purples, yellows, and greens, swelling distorting her cheekbone. Her lip was split, and 4 lines snaked from a bandage on her hand. A sound escaped the chief, a low, guttural exhale that was more pain than breath. It was the sound of a mountain cracking. He moved to her side, his imposing frame suddenly clumsy. He reached out a trembling hand, wanting to touch her, to erase the hurt, but afraid of causing more. His fingers hovered over her bruised cheek, then settled with infinite gentleness on her forehead, pushing back a damp tendril of hair. Her eyelids fluttered open. The confusion in them lasted only a second before recognition dawned, and with it, a flood of such profound shame and relief that it shattered him completely. Daddy. The word was a ragged whisper, a child's cry in the dark. Neka. His voice, usually commanding nations of boardrooms, was broken glass. He sank into the chair beside her, taking her uninjured hand in both of his. He bowed his head over it, his shoulders shaking. The Titan of Port Harcourt was weeping. For a long time, there were no words. There was only the hum of machines, the soft beep of the fetal monitor broadcasting his granddaughter's steady heartbeat, and the silent communication of their clasped hands. Her apology, his forgiveness, her pain, his rage. When he finally raised his head, his tears were gone. In their place was a calm so deep, so cold, it was more terrifying than any outburst. His eyes, now dry and sharp as flint, met those of the doctor who had quietly entered. "Tell me everything," he commanded, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it filled the room. The doctor did. Pneumonia, induced by exposure and trauma. High-risk pregnancy, but the baby was resilient, holding on. The injuries were consistent with blunt force trauma. There were older, faint yellowish bruises on her upper arms. The chief listened, his face a stone mask. When the doctor finished, he asked only one question. Will she recover fully? Both of them. With care, yes. She is strong, and the baby is a fighter. He nodded once, a decisive, final movement. He turned back to Neka. Who did this? In WAM? She looked away, fresh tears leaking. It doesn't matter. It's over. It matters, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The man who did this. The one you hid from me. His name. The silence stretched. She saw not just her father in his eyes, but the ghost of her mother, the fierce protector she remembered. She saw the futility of her secret. For the first time, she saw a path out of the doghouse, not just physically, but from the entire prison of the past 2 years. Chinidu, she whispered, the name tasting like poison. Chinidu Uzoma. Chief Okonkwo leaned forward and kissed her forehead, a seal of promise. Rest now. No one will ever hurt you again. He stood, his full height seeming to draw the light and air from the room. He turned to Musa, who had been a silent shadow by the door. You heard the name. Yes, sir. Find him. Keep him in sight. I will call the commissioner. I want him arrested at his place of work. Not at home. At work. Let his colleagues see. Let his world understand what he is." He paused, his gaze returning to his daughter's battered face. The charges: grievous bodily harm, attempted harm to an unborn child, and, he added, the word dropping like a judge's gavel, abduction. He locked her out of her own home in a storm. "That is abduction." "Yes, Chief." "And Musa," the chief said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "When the police have him, ensure the other inmates know exactly what he did to a pregnant woman. Let his week in custody be an education." Musa gave a single, solemn nod. "It will be known." Chief Okonkwo turned back to the window, looking out over the city that lay at his feet. The man who had struck his daughter was somewhere down there, oblivious, perhaps still nursing his own bruised ego. He would soon learn a fundamental truth: there are different kinds of storms. Some are made of rain and wind. Others are made of money, influence, and a father's wrath. And the latter have a particular way of finding you, no matter where you try to hide. The descent of the Titan had begun, and its target was a single, broken man who had mistaken gentle strength for weakness. The reckoning at dawn. Chinidu's world, in the clear light of the morning after the storm, felt scrubbed clean and strangely justified. The fury of the previous night had spent itself, leaving behind a hollow, self-righteous calm. He had done what a man must do, he told himself. He had drawn a line. She had pushed, she had disrespected him in his own home, and he had enforced the boundary. She would be back, of course. She had nowhere else to go. She would come crawling back, contrite, and he would be magnanimous. He would forgive her, and things would be different. Better. The baby would be the fresh start they needed. He went through his morning ritual with meticulous care, dressing in a crisp blue shirt, knotting his tie just so. The apartment was silent, save for the dripping from the eaves. He ignored the cracked phone on the counter, the overturned chair. He was the master of this quiet, ordered space once more. At the logistics office on Transamati, the hum of computers and the clatter of keyboards were the sounds of normalcy. His colleagues greeted him with their usual nods. He was Chinidu, the hard worker, the man on the rise. He settled at his desk, powered up his computer, and began to draft an email, the very image of professional composure. The reckoning arrived not with a dramatic shout, but with a polite, firm tap on his shoulder. He turned to see two men in plain clothes, their expressions impassive, and behind them, two uniformed police officers. The office chatter died instantly. "Chinidu Uzoma," the lead plainclothes officer asked, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. Chinida's heart gave a violent lurch. "Yes? Can I help you? We are from the State Criminal Investigation Department. You are under arrest for the offenses of grievous bodily harm, attempted harm to an unborn child, and abduction." The words were so absurd, so colossal, that for a moment Chinidu could only stare. A nervous titter escaped from a nearby cubicle, quickly stifled. He saw the faces of his colleagues: shock, curiosity, averted eyes. This is a mistake," he stammered, rising from his chair. "There must be some mistake. Who has accused me?" "The complaint has been filed by the family of Neka Okonkwo," the officer stated, and the name meant nothing to Chinidu, only adding to his confusion. "Okonkwo? I don't know any Okonkwo. My girlfriend is Neka Ease. She's an orphan. This is nonsense." His voice was rising, tinged with panic. The officer's lip curled slightly. "Sir, please come quietly." They handcuffed him right there, at his desk, the cold metal biting into his wrists. The humiliation was a live wire, shocking and total. He was paraded past rows of silent, staring colleagues, out of the glass doors of the office building, and into the back of a waiting black Maria van. The last thing he saw was the bright, uncaring sun glinting off the office windows. The processing at the station was a blur of cold procedure. Fingerprints, mugshots, the confiscation of his belt and shoes. He was thrown into a holding cell to await arraignment. The cell was already occupied. The first lesson began almost immediately. The cellmates were three: a wiry pickpocket with quick eyes, a burly man with tribal marks who said nothing, and a younger man who looked perpetually nervous. The wiry one-eyed Chinidu's good shirt and polished shoes. "Oga, what didn't you do?" he asked, his tone deceptively light. Chinidu, still clinging to a shred of his dignity, straightened. "It is a misunderstanding. A family matter." The burly man spoke for the first time, his voice like gravel. Family matter don't bring you here with GBH and abduction? Who you wound? Who you kidnap? Chinidu remained silent, looking away. His silence was an answer. The younger inmate shook his head, a knowing look of disgust on his face. Nah woman be dat. Only woman matter day bring that kind hate for police eye. The wiry man's demeanor changed. The casual curiosity vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory focus. He stood up, circling Chinidu. You beat woman? He asked softly. It's not like that, Chinidu began. You beat pregnant woman? The man pressed, his voice dropping to a whisper. I hear the policeman talk for outside. Attempted harm to unborn child. The air in the cell thickened. The burly man slowly got to his feet. In the brutal, unspoken code of this underworld, certain crimes placed you at the very bottom. Harming women and children was chief among them. My sister, the burly man said, cracking his knuckles, a sound like breaking sticks in the quiet cell. My sister married person like you. We find him one day for gutter. Chinidu backed against the cold wall, the reality of his situation crashing down. This wasn't about apologies or promises. This was about consequence. Raw, unfiltered, and utterly merciless. Wait, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Please. They did not wait. The first blow was to his kidney, a deep, sickening punch that drove the air from his lungs. The second was a slap, open-handed and humiliating, echoing the one he'd given Neka. They were experts. They avoided his face, aiming for the body, where the bruises wouldn't show. They took his food that evening, leaving him with a stale crust of bread. They made him sleep on the floor near the filthy toilet. When he tried to protest, a foot connected with his ribs. You think you be big man? The wiry one hissed in his ear as Chinidu curled in pain. Here, you be less than dog. Dog no day beat pregnant woman. Night fell in the cell. The fear was a physical presence, a cold sweat that never dried. The pain was a constant, throbbing symphony. But worse than the pain was the dawning, horrific understanding. This was what terror felt like. This helplessness. This total loss of control over your own body and safety. This was a fraction of what he had inflicted on Neka, week after week, in the place she should have felt safest. Alone in the dark, listening to the snores of his tormentors, the walls of his constructed reality crumbled. The blueprint from ABA was not a guide to strength. It was a manual for creating monsters. His father's control was just a pretty word for cowardice. And he, Chinidu, had not been a man defending his home. He had been a coward, terrorizing the one person who had loved him. The police outside were the least of his worries. The real judgment was here, in this stinking cell, meted out by society's outcasts who held a moral code higher than his own. As a new day's gray light filtered through the high, barred window, Chinidu Uzoma, broken in body and spirit, finally began to learn. The first lesson was fear. The second, just beginning to take root in the fertile soil of his humiliation, was a shuddering, unbearable remorse. The reckoning had arrived, and it wore the face of the very violence he had so casually dispensed. The hollowed-out man. The 5 days that followed were a descent into a new kind of hell, one meticulously tailored by unseen hands. Chinidu was not just another inmate. He was a marked man. The message had been delivered with brutal efficiency on that first day, and it was reinforced daily in 100 small, degrading ways. The warden, a stern man who had received a very specific phone call, looked through him as if he were glass. The other inmates, even those not in his cell, seemed to know. Averted eyes, muttered curses, food accidentally knocked from his hands in the queue. He was moved to a larger, more crowded cell. The new cell boss, a grizzled man doing time for armed robbery, called him baby beater and made him responsible for cleaning the slop bucket, a task performed under the watchful, disgusted eyes of men who had committed far worse crimes, but who drew the line at his. The casual cruelty was relentless. Sleep was stolen from him by sudden kicks to his legs. His water ration was confiscated for imaginary infractions. The constant, low-grade terror was an acid, eating away at the last vestiges of his pride. But the physical torment was secondary to the psychological demolition. In the suffocating silence of the night, with only the sounds of snoring and scurrying rats for company, his mind became a torturous cinema. He was no longer the protagonist of his own story. He was the spectator, forced to watch reel after reel of his own cruelty. He saw Neka's face, not as he remembered it in anger, but as it was in the moments after impact. The stunned betrayal in her eyes when he first slapped her over the shirt. The way her hand had flown to her cheek, not in anger, but in pure, childlike shock. He heard the desperate scrape of her fingernails against the front door as he locked her out in the storm. But the image that haunted him most, the one that would jerk him awake in a cold sweat, was one he had not even witnessed. Nneka, 7 months pregnant with his child, curled and shivering in the cramped, muddy dog house. He saw the German shepherd's confused eyes. He smelled the wet wood and damp earth. He felt the utter, soul-crushing desolation she must have felt. He had done that. He had put the mother of his child in an animal shelter. The memory of his own mother's face, worn and resigned, superimposed itself over Nneka's. For the first time, he did not see his mother's patience as strength, but as a devastating survival tactic. He saw the prison she had lived in, a prison he had admired and had now meticulously reconstructed for the woman he claimed to love. The blueprint was not a badge of manhood. It was a disease, and he was its feverish, contagious carrier. On the morning of the 6th day, hollow-eyed and moving with the careful stiffness of a man whose body was a map of hidden bruises, he was informed he would be released. The chief's influence worked in both directions, to arrest with public shame and to release before formal charges were cemented. It was a message in itself. I can put you in this hell, and I can take you out. Your life is mine to shape. There were no conditions given at the station, no warnings uttered by the police. The silence was more potent. He was simply pushed out of the heavy steel door into the blinding, cacophonous freedom of the street. He stood there, swaying slightly, his cheap clothes rumpled and smelling of sweat and disinfectant. The world was too bright, too loud. He was a ghost. He did not go to Nneka's apartment. That place was a crime scene in his mind. He went to a cheap, pay-by-the-hour motel on the outskirts of town. He locked the door, drew the thin, stained curtains, and sat on the edge of the hard bed. The hollow feeling was complete. The anger that had once filled him, that had given him a false sense of power and purpose, was gone. In its place was a vast, echoing cavern of shame. He was not a wrong man. He was the wrong. He was not misunderstood. He was understanding, for the first time, the monster he had become. He thought of the baby, his daughter. He now felt with a certainty that was a new kind of pain. He had tried to kill her, not directly, but by attacking her mother, by exposing her to the cold and the rain and terror. He had tried to erase his own future before it could judge him. For 2 days, he stayed in that room. He didn't eat. He drank water from the rusty tap. He slept fitfully, haunted by the doghouse and the cold metal of the cell. He replayed every apology he had ever given Nneka, the tears, the promises, the self-flagellation. He saw them now for what they were, not remorse, but manipulation, tools to end the conflict and restore his comfort. They were the pleas of a child who had broken a toy and was crying not for the toy, but because he might be punished. On the 3rd morning, he looked at his reflection in the motel's speckled mirror. The man who stared back was a stranger, haunted, defeated, empty. The Chinidu who believed in his own righteous authority was dead, murdered in a jail cell by the truth. What was left was a hollowed-out shell, a vessel filled only with the acrid smoke of his own deeds. And in that emptiness, a single, clear directive formed. It was not born of love for Nneka. He felt he had forfeited the right to even think that word. It was born of a desperate, last-ditch need to atone, to perform one right action in a life suddenly revealed as a sequence of wrongs. He had to marry her, not as a claim, but as a chain, to legally bind himself to her and the child, to make himself eternally, financially, and socially responsible. It would be his life sentence, since he had escaped a legal one. He would spend every remaining day proving, through sheer, silent action, that he could be different. He would never touch her again. He would become the opposite of his father, present, providing, and perfectly, permanently harmless. He would build a real house for them, one with no echoes of blows, and he would live in the doghouse of his own conscience forever. He washed his face. He left the motel. He went to the only place he could think of to begin this grotesque, necessary penance, a small, struggling law office he knew of, to inquire about the cost of a marriage license. He walked with the slow, heavy gait of a man heading to his own execution, willing it, because it was the only thing left that resembled justice. The terms of surrender, the small, Buzzing fluorescent light in the lawyer's office hummed like a trapped insect, casting a sickly green pallor over the cheap wood veneer of the desk. Chinidu sat opposite Barrister Nwankwo, a tired-looking man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, who flipped through a dog-eared legal pad without much enthusiasm. The air smelled of dust and mildew. "A marriage license is straightforward, Mr. Uzoma," the lawyer droned, reciting fees from memory. "You will need 2 witnesses, both of you present, the standard forms." Chinita barely heard him. He was rehearsing the words in his head, the plea he would make to Neka. It felt like preparing for a battle where he had already laid down his weapons and was now begging for the privilege of being taken prisoner. The lawyer's phone rang, a shrill, old-fashioned sound. Barrister Nwankwo excused himself and answered. "Yes, speaking." His bored expression vanished, replaced by a sudden, profound alertness. He sat up straighter, his free hand fiddling with his tie. "Yes, sir." "Of course, sir. He is here with me now." "Yes, I understand. Perfectly clear." Chinidu watched, a cold dread seeping into his already chilled bones. The lawyer's eyes flicked to him, not with pity, but with the assessing gaze of a man who has just been handed a live grenade and instructions. "I will convey the message, sir." "Absolutely. Goodbye." Barrister Nwankwo hung up the phone carefully, as if it were made of glass. He took off his spectacles, polished them slowly, and then leveled a look at Chinidu that stripped him bare. "That," the lawyer said, his voice now devoid of its earlier drone, crisp and cold, "was Chief Ebenezer Okonkwo's personal attorney. My senior, in every conceivable way." Chinidu's mouth went dry. He said nothing. "It seems," Barrister Nwankwo continued, placing his hands flat on the desk, "that your plans have been anticipated. The chief is aware you are out. He is aware you are here, and he has issued an invitation." "An invitation?" Chinidu croaked. "A summons," the lawyer corrected. "You are to present yourself at the Okonkwo residence on Independence Layout this evening at 7 o'clock. Not a minute late. You will be received." The motel room had felt like a prison, but this was being marched to the gallows by the architect of your doom. Chinidu simply nodded, the will to question or resist utterly absent. That evening, as the sun bled orange over the manicured gardens of the most exclusive estate in Port Harcourt, Chinidu stood at the imposing wrought iron gates. He wore the same clothes from the motel, now freshly washed but irredeemably shabby against the backdrop of obscene wealth. A security guard in a crisp uniform wordlessly opened a pedestrian door for him. The walk up the serpentine driveway, lined with flowering hibiscus and silent, watchful cameras, felt longer than his entire life. The house was not a house. It was a statement in marble and glass, a monument to power. A steward in a white jacket led him through cavernous, cool rooms where original art probably cost more than Chinidu would earn in a lifetime, and out to a vast, covered veranda that overlooked a floodlit infinity pool merging with the darkening river beyond. Chief Okonkwo sat in a high-backed cane chair, silhouetted against the twilight. He was not reading. He was not on his phone. He was simply waiting, a king on a throne of quiet wrath. A second, simpler chair was placed opposite him, 10 feet away. No table between them. No offer of drink. "Sit," the chief said. It was not a word, but a command that vibrated in the air. Chinidu sat, perching on the edge of the chair, his hands clenched between his knees. He could not bring himself to look at the man directly, so he stared at the exquisite Persian rug under his worn shoes. For a full minute, the only sound was the distant chirp of crickets and the gentle splash of the pool filter. The chief let the silence do its work, letting Chinidu stew in the absolute disparity of their positions. Finally, the chief spoke, his voice a low, calm rumble that carried perfectly in the open air. "My daughter calls her Adigo. Daughter of money. An irony, I suppose, given the circumstances of her conception's near end." Hearing the baby's name on this man's lips, a name he had no right to know, sent a fresh wave of shame through Chinidu. He remained silent. "Look at me," the chief commanded. Chinidu forced his head up. The chief's eyes were not blazing with the fury he expected. They were cold, clear, and depthless, like a deep well in which a man could drown without a sound. This was worse than anger. "You put my heir," the chief said, enunciating each word with terrifying precision, "in a dog kennel." The statement hung there, stark and undeniable. There was no defense. Chinidu's throat worked, but no sound came out. I could have you buried in a hole so deep your own shadow would not find you. The chief continued, his tone conversational. I could make you a ghost in this country you think you know. A non-person. It would cost me less than the electricity for this pool. Chinidu believed him absolutely. But the chief sighed, a sound of immense, weary power. My child, in her infinite and, to me, inexplicable mercy, still carries some fragment of feeling for you. And she carries your child. So, you have a choice. A simple one. He leaned forward slightly, and the movement felt tectonic. Choice 1. You walk out of this compound now. You change your name. You leave Port Harcourt, leave the South-South entirely. You will never contact NECA or attempt to see the child again. If you do, the ghost-making begins. This is a clean end. Chinidu's heart hammered against his ribs. Escape. A clean end. To run from the crushing weight of his guilt. It was unbearably tempting. Choice 2. The chief said, his gaze boring into Chinidu's soul. If she, in her folly, will still have you, you marry her. Properly. Respectably. But you will live by my rules. You will attend weekly counseling with a therapist of my choosing, and you will provide me with proof of attendance. You will never, from this second forward, raise your voice to her. You will never lay a hand on her in anger. You will never so much as grip her arm too tightly. You will be a shadow in your own home, present, providing, and silent. If I hear a whisper, a sigh, a hint of the man you were, you will vanish. Not from her life, from the face of the earth. Do you understand the geometry of this? Chinidu understood. He would be allowed to exist, but not to live. He would be a tenant in his own family, his lease revocable at the slightest infraction. It was not a marriage. It was a lifelong probation, with a billionaire as his parole officer. The wedding, the chief finished, will be in 2 weeks. Small. Private. I will arrange everything. Your only role is to show up, sober, and say I do. Then, you will spend every day for the rest of your life proving that those 2 words were not another lie. The chief leaned back, his verdict delivered. So, choose. Walk away into obscurity, or walk into a gilded cage of your own making. But know this, the cage has only one rule. Her safety and happiness are absolute. You are irrelevant except as an instrument to ensure them. Chinidu did not need to deliberate. The hollowed-out man from the motel saw not a cage, but a structure. Not a prison, but a penitentiary where he could serve his sentence. Walking away was the easy choice, the selfish choice. The choice of the old Chinidu. He met the chief's gaze, his own eyes stripped of all pretense, all anger, all pride. There was only a bleak acceptance. I will marry her, he whispered, his voice rough with disuse. I will abide by your rules. All of them. Chief Okonkwo stared at him for a long moment, searching for the deceit, the hidden rage. He saw only the hollow. He gave a single, slow nod. Then we have an understanding. You may go. You will be contacted with details. Do not attempt to see her before the wedding. She is recovering. Chinidu stood, his legs weak. He gave a stiff, shallow bow, a gesture of submission that felt both alien and utterly appropriate. He turned and walked back down the long driveway, the weight of the future settling on his shoulders like a yoke. He had surrendered completely. He had chosen the cage. It was the first truly selfless act of his life, and it felt like being buried alive. A ceremony of silent promises. The wedding of Nneka Okonkwo and Chinidu Uzoma was an event of profound, unsettling quiet. It was held in the manicured garden of the Okonkwo estate, not in a church. There were no crowds, no cheering. Only 20 people were in attendance, each one carefully selected by Chief Okonkwo. A few stoic relatives, the family lawyer, the chief's personal doctor, Musa the head of security standing watch at a discreet distance, and Mr. Okafor, the social worker, whose presence felt like both a witness and a monitor. Nneka, radiant yet fragile in a simple, elegant ivory gown that flowed over the gentle swell of her pregnancy, was a vision of poignant beauty. The bruises had faded to faint shadows, expertly concealed by makeup, but the new wariness in her eyes was a mark no cosmetic could hide. She walked down a short aisle of rose petals alone, her hand not on her father's arm, but resting protectively over Adigo. Chief Okonkwo watched from the front row, his expression impassive, a king ensuring a difficult but necessary treaty was signed. Chinidu stood before the officiating pastor, looking like a man awaiting a verdict, not a blessing. He wore a new suit that felt like a borrowed skin. His eyes, when they met Neka's as she approached, held no triumph, no possessiveness. They held only a deep, abject solemnity, and a plea for a chance he knew he did not deserve. The vows were the standard ones, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health. But as they spoke the words, they echoed with a private, terrible resonance. Neka's voice was clear but thin, like glass stretched to its limit. Chinidu's was a low, gravelly whisper, each word dragged from a place of raw shame. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, there was no cheer. A soft, collective sigh seemed to pass through the small gathering, one of relief tinged with apprehension. The reception was a brief, stilted luncheon under a striped canopy. Chinidu did not mingle. He stood slightly apart, a sentinel at his own feast, accepting quiet, cool congratulations with a nod. He did not touch his new wife. He did not kiss her when prompted, offering only a stiff, respectful bow of his head, which was more chilling than any display of affection. The message was clear. This was not a union of passion, but a contract of atonement. The wedding gift from Chief Okonkwo was not a car or a house, but a set of keys to a spacious, beautiful guest house on the far edge of the estate grounds. It had its own garden, a modern kitchen, a nursery already painted in soft yellows and filled with everything a child could need. It was a gilded annex, separate from the main house, but undeniably within its walls and under its watch. Their new home was a symbol. You are family, but you are on probation. Your independence is a privilege I grant. As the last of the guests departed, Neka stood in the spacious living room of the guest house, still in her wedding dress, feeling utterly disconnected from the woman in white. Chinidu stood near the door, as if unsure he was permitted to fully enter. Neka, he began, his voice barely audible. He did not call her Nem. He would not presume that intimacy again. I want you to know. The rules your father set, they are a mercy. I will follow them. Every one. You will never have reason to fear me again. This is my vow to you, beyond the one I just said. He spoke not like a husband, but like a soldier reporting to a superior. It was unnerving. This is your home, he continued, gesturing stiffly. I am here to support, to provide. That is all. He then did something that shocked her more than any blow ever had. He walked to the far side of the large living room, to a door that led to a small study. I will sleep in here. You take the main bedroom. I have already moved my things. He was partitioning their marriage bed before it even existed, building his own doghouse, this one within the walls of a palace, and sentencing himself to it. Neka could only nod, a complex storm of emotions swirling within her. Relief so profound it felt like pain, a grief for the normal marriage they would never have, and a fragile, tentative flicker of something that was not yet trust, but was perhaps the cessation of active dread. Okay, she whispered. He nodded once, a sharp, military motion. I will start dinner, he said, and retreated into the kitchen, leaving her alone in the grandeur of their silent, arranged life. That night, as Neka lay in the luxurious king-sized bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the estate, the hum of a generator, the distant call of a night bird, she felt the baby kick. She placed a hand on her belly. Adigo, she whispered. We are safe. It was the first time she had believed those words in over a year. Through the wall, in the narrow study, Chinidu lay on a firm daybed, staring at the ceiling. The silence was not peaceful. It was heavy with the ghosts of his actions. He could hear the faint creak of Neka's bed, the soft closing of a door. Every sound was a reminder of the distance he had carved between them, a distance he now pledged to maintain as his lifelong penance. The ceremony was over. The real work of this stark, silent marriage had begun. He was a husband in name, a prisoner in practice, and a father-to-be shrouded in regret. She was a wife by decree, a survivor in a sanctuary, and a mother-to-be grasping at the first threads of peace. Their union was not a beginning, but a fragile, carefully negotiated ceasefire. And in the quiet of the Okonkwo estate, under the watchful eye of a vengeful patriarch, they both began the long, uncertain work of living within its terms. The architecture of a new life. Life in the guest house settled into a rhythm as precise and quiet as the ticking of a Swiss watch. It was a world built on unspoken rules and visible boundaries, a domestic experiment observed by an unseen, omnipotent warden. Shinidu became a ghost of a husband, a study in meticulous, silent utility. He woke before dawn, using the small in-soot bathroom in his study to avoid the main one. He would prepare breakfast, a perfectly diced fruit platter, soft scrambled eggs, whole wheat toast, leaving it covered on the kitchen counter before retreating to his study until he heard Neka emerge. He left for work in the logistics company Chief Okonkwo had, with chilling pragmatism, ensured he kept his job, a man needed to provide. After all, with a soft, "I am leaving." He returned exactly at 6, bearing groceries he had purchased with his own salary. He cooked dinner, always noting her preferences, never his own. He cleaned with a fervor that bordered on the obsessive, as if scrubbing every surface could also scour his soul. Every Tuesday evening, like clockwork, he would leave for 2 hours. His counseling session with Dr. Amina, the stern but brilliant therapist on the chief's payroll. He never spoke of what transpired there, but he would return quieter, paler, sometimes with eyes red-rimmed from unspoken tears. He would go straight to his study, the click of the lock a soft punctuation mark on his hour of reckoning. Neka, in the beginning, moved through the beautiful rooms like a visitor in a museum. The freedom from fear was so unfamiliar it felt like a new kind of confinement. She jumped at sudden noises, flinched when he moved too quickly, braced for an outburst that never came. But slowly, day by silent day, her body began to unlearn its terror. The tight coil in her chest began, incrementally, to loosen. Her pregnancy progressed under the watchful eye of a private obstetrician. Shinidu attended every appointment, sitting rigidly in the corner of the plush consulting room, speaking only when asked a direct question. "Is the baby's weight normal, doctor? Is my wife in any pain?" His concern was clinical, respectful, and utterly detached from himself. The first true test came one evening when a severe thunderstorm rolled over the estate, mirroring the one that had been their undoing. The lights flickered. The wind howled around the guest house corners. Neka, sitting in the living room, felt a familiar, icy claw of panic grip her. Her breathing grew shallow. She could almost smell the wet doghouse, feel the mud. Shinidu, who had been reading a logistics journal in his study, appeared in the doorway. He did not approach her. He stood at a respectful distance, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. "The generator will engage in 30 seconds, he said, his voice calm and factual, a bulwark against the chaos outside. "It is a secure system. The windows are hurricane-rated. We are perfectly safe." He wasn't offering comfort. He was delivering a security report. But the steadiness of his tone, the absolute absence of the old, stormy anger, acted as an anchor. The lights stabilized, powered by the distant hum of the generator. Neka took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded. He gave a single nod in return and withdrew. It was a small moment, but a seismic one. He had not used her fear as an opportunity for control or cruelty. He had simply provided data and stability. It was the first brick in a new, fragile foundation. The birth of Adigo was another controlled, clinical event. It happened in a private hospital suite that resembled a five-star hotel. Shinidu was present, at Neka's hesitant request. He stood by her head, as instructed by the midwife, his hand never touching her except to offer a cold cloth for her forehead at the nurse's suggestion. When Adigo, pink and furious, was placed on Neka's chest, Shinidu took one step back. He watched, his face a mask of such profound, conflicted awe that it was almost painful to behold. A staggering love for the child instantly at war with his own unworthiness to be her father. In the following weeks, he proved himself indispensable in the most unexpected ways. He mastered the sterilizer, prepared bottles with scientific precision, and took the night shift with Adigo, bringing her to Neka for feeding and then immediately whisking her away to be changed and soothed so Neka could sleep. He was a flawless, silent assistant. He would gaze at his daughter as she slept in his arms, his expression one of heartbreaking tenderness, but he would always hand her back to Neka the moment she stirred, as if relinquishing a treasure he was only allowed to hold temporarily. One afternoon, Neka found him in the nursery, Adigo asleep in the crib. He was not looking at the baby, but at a small, framed photo on the dresser. It was the only photo in the room, a picture of Neka, heavily pregnant, smiling tentatively in the garden, taken by her father. Shinidu's shoulders were slumped, his head bowed. He didn't hear her approach. "You can hold her when she's awake, you know," Neka said softly, startling him. You don't have to wait until she's asleep. He straightened as if electrocuted, wiping hastily at his eyes. I do not wish to impose, he said, his voice thick. My touch, she should not be conditioned to it. It is better. The self-loathing in the statement took Neka's breath away. The architecture of their new life was solid, but it was built on the bedrock of his profound penance. He was building a world of safety for them, but he was excluding himself from its grace. She didn't know how to bridge that gap. The wounds were too fresh, the history too dark. But for the first time, looking at this broken, meticulously careful man who was the father of her child, she felt not fear, nor pity, but a confused and weary sadness. The monster was gone. In its place was a ghost, haunting the beautiful, safe house he had helped provide. And she was no longer just a prisoner or a survivor. She was becoming, slowly, the warden of his remorse, and the mother of a child who would need to know her father. The new life had a firm architecture, but its interior remained a landscape of silent, uncharted rooms. The quiet gardener. 5 years passed not as a slow march, but as a series of gentle, accumulating seasons within the walls of the Okonkwo estate. The guest house was no longer just a probationary annex. It was a home, softened by the chaos and joy of a growing child. Adago's toys formed bright constellations across the polished floors. Her laughter, a sound as clear and life-giving as a spring, became the true soundtrack of their days. Chinedu had become a fixture, as reliable and undemanding as the sunrise. He was the quiet architect of their daily peace. He rose first to prepare Adago's school lunch, cutting her sandwiches into playful shapes. He drove her to the elite international preschool, his large hands carefully adjusting the straps of her tiny backpack. In the evenings, he helped her with her phonics, his voice patient and low, utterly devoid of the sharp edges that once laced his every word. To Adigo, he was simply Daddy, the man who gave shoulder-high rides, who could fix any broken toy, and whose study was a mysterious, off-limits place where he sometimes retreated with a tired smile. She knew no other version of him. The man who had once ruled by fear was now a servant to her giggles, his authority expressed only in gentle guidance and unwavering presence. Neko watched this transformation with a complex heart. The fear was a distant memory, a bad dream from another life. In its place was a settled, if peculiar, gratitude. Chinedu had kept his vows with monastic discipline. Not a raised voice, not a harsh word, not a single gesture that could be construed as a threat. The weekly counseling sessions continued, a line item on the chief's ledger and a sacred ritual for Chinedu. He had excavated the poison of his childhood with Dr. Amina, and in its place, he had installed a strict code of conduct based on silent service. One soft evening, with the golden light of the setting sun filtering through the garden's flamboyant trees, Neka sat on the veranda sketching. Adigo, now a whirlwind of energy with her father's eyes and her mother's gentle mouth, was chasing fireflies on the lawn. Chinedu was not with them. He was a little way off, in a small, dedicated patch of earth he had requested from the chief's gardener. It was his own project. He was building a dog house. Not a crude, utilitarian shelter, but a beautiful, sturdy little structure made of smooth, treated cedar. It had a proper shingled roof, a raised floor to keep out damp, and even a small, curtained doorway. It was oversized, spacious enough for a large dog, though they had no pet. He worked on it most evenings, sanding the wood to a satin finish, his focus absolute. From her perch, Neka watched him. She watched the careful, reverent way he measured and sawed, the way he would sometimes pause, running a hand over the smooth wood, his gaze distant. She understood. This was no ordinary project. This was an exorcism. He was rebuilding the symbol of her deepest humiliation into an object of safety, of craftsmanship, of pointless, beautiful care. He was building the doghouse that should have been. A sanctuary, not a prison. Adigo tumbled over to him, clutching a captured firefly in her cupped hands. Daddy, look. A star that blinked. Chinedu put down his sanding block and knelt in the grass, bringing himself to her level, a gesture of deference he performed instinctively. It is beautiful, Ada M., he said softly. But let it go now. Its family will be looking for it. Obediently, she opened her hands, and the insect zipped away into the twilight. She then pointed at the little house. Is it for a doggy? Chinedu's eyes flickered, just for a second, towards Neka on the veranda before returning to his daughter. It is for anyone who needs shelter, he said carefully. So they will always have a safe place, dry and strong. Can I play in it? When it is finished, he promised. Later, after Adigo was asleep, the house settled into its usual quiet. Neka stood at the large window overlooking the garden. The nearly finished doghouse sat under a spreading isla tree, bathed in moonlight. Chinidu was sitting on a bench nearby, not working, just looking at it. She felt a strange pull, an urge that was no longer born of fear or obligation. She walked out into the cool night air, her footsteps silent on the dew-kissed grass. He heard her approach and stood immediately, a habit of readiness he could not break. Neka, he said, a note of quiet concern in his voice. Is everything all right? Is Adigo? She's fine, Neka interrupted, her voice gentle. She stood beside him, looking at the little house. It's beautiful work, Chinidu. He nodded, swallowing hard. It is just a thing to do. They stood in silence for a moment, the ghosts of the past a tangible presence between them in the fragrant dark. She doesn't know, Neka said finally, not looking at him. She has no idea of the man you were. To her, you are perfect. A shudder went through him. Do not say that, he whispered, pained. I am not. I am just here, trying not to be the man I was. I know, she said. And she did. She saw the daily effort, the eternal vigilance he held against his own darkness. The love she had once felt for him was gone, burned away in the rain and the doghouse. But in its place was something else, a respect for the battle he fought within himself every single day, and a weary empathy for the hollowed-out man who had emerged from the jail cell and chosen this penitent's path. The doghouse, she said, gesturing towards it. It's good. It's finished. You don't have to keep rebuilding it. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw the endless echo of that stormy night. I will always be rebuilding it, he said, his voice raw with a truth he usually kept buried. Every day? In here. He tapped his chest lightly. This one is just for the garden. Neka nodded, understanding. The physical house was a testament. The internal one was his lifelong sentence. And she and Adigo were the unintended beneficiaries of that sentence, living in the peaceful world his remorse had built around them. She reached out then, not to touch him, but to place her hand on the smooth, cool wood of the doghouse roof. A gesture of acknowledgement, of closure. Good night, Chinidu. Good night, Neka, he replied, his voice steady now, anchored by her simple acceptance of this strange, shared truth. She walked back to the house, to her daughter, to the life they had. He remained in the garden for a while longer, the quiet gardener tending not to flowers, but to the intricate, invisible landscape of his atonement. The story had no fairy tale ending, no passionate reunion. It had something rarer, a hard one, fragile peace, purchased with the currency of relentless, daily choice. The doghouse stood empty in the moonlight, a beautiful, solid symbol of a shelter that now, finally, was never needed. And so, the story of the doghouse and the billionaire's daughter finds its quiet resting place. This was never a tale of grand, cinematic revenge, nor of a love that conquers all. It was a story about the silent, seismic aftershocks of violence and the long, unglamorous road that might, or might not, lead away from it. We witnessed the making of a monster in the echoing rooms of ABA, where love was twisted into control. We followed the journey of a woman who traded a gilded cage for one of fear, believing it to be freedom. We saw how the deepest secrets can be the heaviest chains. And we watched as the very architecture of cruelty was dismantled, brick by painful brick, not by a hero's sword, but by the suffocating weight of consequence and the deliberate, daily choice to be better. If you took this journey with Chinidu, Neka, and Adigo, we thank you. Thank you for witnessing the darkness without looking away. Thank you for holding space for Neka's fragile hope and her hard-earned peace. Thank you for observing Chinidu's painful excavation of his own soul, understanding that redemption is not a moment, but a lifetime of labor. Stories like these are mirrors. May they reflect the parts of our world that need attention, the silent sufferers who need a voice, and the enduring truth that no one is born a monster. They are built, piece by piece. And thus, they can also be unmade. Thank you for watching. May your own spaces be filled with kindness, your shelters be strong, and your love be a sanctuary never a siege. The end.